Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views magazine on European politics. Germany is not allowed to pass on Swiss-made ammunition for the Gepard anti-aircraft tank to Ukraine. Due to Swiss neutrality, it's not possible to grant the German request for the further export of this ammunition to Ukraine, explained Economics Minister Guy Parmelin in a letter to Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht, published on Thursday. Swiss law therefore prohibits exports to countries involved in an armed conflict, but not before. Germany had already asked Bern in early summer whether it could deliver the 12,400 rounds of ammunition for the Gepard anti-aircraft tank to Kiev. Switzerland had rejected this in June with reference to the neutrality requirement. Lambrecht then recently wrote a letter to Switzerland again, as a spokesman announced on Monday. According to media reports, the minister asked her Swiss colleague Viola Amherd for permission to re-export the 35mm ammunition for the Gepard. And according to the German magazine Spiegel, Lambrecht referred to the protection of Ukraine's critical infrastructure. She also referred to the protection of ports in the south of the country, which are crucial for exporting grain. The Gepard, in English it's a cheetah, was the first heavy weapon system that Germany had promised to Ukraine. By September, all 30 promised anti-aircraft tanks were delivered to Ukraine. Finally. The problem, however, was the ammunition from the start. Initially, only around 60,000 shots were available, which was often criticized as insufficient due to the high rate of fire of the anti-aircraft guns. And according to Spiegel, Lambrecht reported in her most recent letter to Switzerland that there was an urgent lack of ammunition because of the intense use of the Gepard against Russian drones and cruise missiles. The session of the French Parliament was adjourned after an apparently racist statement, and that even got the president on the scene. French President Emmanuel Macron has expressed his outrage over what was considered racist by a politician from the right-wing populist Rassemblement National, or RN party, to a left-wing black MP during a parliamentary session. Macron's environment said on Thursday that the president was shocked by these unacceptable words both in the plenary hall and outside. The incident occurred as black MP Carlos Martins Bilongo of the left-wing populist party La France Insoumise, or LFI, spoke about the drama of illegal immigration during a session of the National Assembly. RN MP Grégoire de Fournat said qu'il retournait en Afrique. It's roughly, let him go back to Africa. The parliamentarian admitted this to the press, although de Fournat stated that by he meant the lifeboat of an aid organization currently in the Mediterranean. In French, this is possible because, unlike, for example, in my language in German, the grammatical gender of the word boat is masculine. The incident made waves. After a few minutes of confusion, the president of the National Assembly ended the session given the gravity of the events. And such an interruption is extremely rare there. Carlos Martins Bilongo said RN MPs twisted the words to justify the unjustifiable. He was so sad to be referred to his skin color. His party supported the deputy. The polemic created by our political opponents is primitive and will not deceive the French, said RN boss Marine Le Pen on Twitter, though. De Fournat himself wrote to the MP concerned that his statement had been misunderstood and that he regretted if you felt hurt by it. But those right-wing idiots always do that, misunderstood. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has arrived in Beijing for his first visit as German head of government. His plane landed at the airport in the Chinese capital on Friday morning, local time. After his arrival, a meeting with the head of state and party leader Xi Jinping was on the agenda. Scholz is the first Western head of government to meet Xi Jinping after his re-election as party leader almost 2 weeks ago. Because of the continued strict corona restrictions in China, Scholz's visit lasted only 11 hours, making it shorter than any other chancellor's trips to the world's most populous country before. Since the beginning of the pandemic, almost 3 years ago, the Chancellor has been the first head of government from the group of large industrialized nations, or G7, to visit China again. He also met Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, who is due to step down next March. The German government Airbus only stopped briefly at Beijing Airport on Friday morning to drop off the Chancellor and his delegation. The machine then flew on to South Korea, where it was to be parked for a few hours before picking up Scholz and his delegation in the evening, with a changed crew though. And of course, once again in Beijing, and bringing them back to Berlin then. Otherwise, the old crew would have had to remain in quarantine in China, said German government officials. It's China in Germany, and that's why it sometimes happens. Only 11 hours, as I said, were planned for Scholz to stay in Beijing with enormous travel expenses. The outward and return flights alone add up to 23 hours. The planners in the Federal Chancellery refrained from staying overnight on site due to the strict corona requirements. In Scholz's environment, there was mocking talk of a day trip to the Far East, hence. Employees of the Chinese Health Authority in white full-body protective suits received the Chancellor's delegation on the tarmac at Beijing Airport in the morning to subject them to a PCR test. In specially modified laboratory buses, they gently pressed the cotton swab down the throats of the members of the Chancellor's delegation. Just put a bit picturesque here. The Chancellor himself had the PCR test carried out on board his plane by a German doctor who had traveled with him, but under the supervision of the Chinese. In this way, he was able to prevent the Chinese authorities from gaining access to the Chancellor's biometric data via DNA material. Even before leaving for Beijing, Scholz, his entire delegation, and the journalists traveling with him had to present 2 PCR tests with negative results. After all, more than 60 people. The Chancellor was accompanied by around a dozen top managers, including the CEOs of Volkswagen, BMW, BASF, Bayer, and Deutsche Bank. Scholz also met local company representatives in Beijing. The timing of the trip so soon after the Party Congress, where Xi Jinping further expanded his power, is disputed though. Chinese dissidents and the World Uyghur Congress had even called for it to be cancelled. Shortly before his departure, Scholz had announced a new course towards China in the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. It is clear that if China changes, the way we deal with China must also change, Scholz said. Scholz also wanted to address difficult issues such as human rights issues and dealing with minorities during his talks in Beijing. Scholz expressed concern about the situation around Taiwan and indirectly warned China of an invasion. There's a lot of excitement in Italy at the moment over an old photo. It shows the designated Secretary of State of the recently elected government with a swastika armband. The picture shows politician Galeazzo Bignami from the ultra-right governing party Fratelli d'Italia, that means Brothers of Italy, in a black shirt and a red armband. Numerous users shared the picture on Twitter and criticized Bignami. The recording is said to have been taken during a bachelor party in 2005, as several media reported on Tuesday. Fratelli boss and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni wants to make him state secretary in the Ministry of Infrastructure led by Lega boss Matteo Salvini. The swearing-in ceremony for the state secretaries was scheduled now for Wednesday. According to reports from various media, the photo was already making the rounds in 2016. Bignami said on Monday he was ashamed of the admission. However, it is absurd to publish almost 20-year-old private photos again, for which he has apologized several times. Italy's new Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and her Fratelli d'Italia party have led Italy's most right-wing governments since the founding of the Republic in 1946. The party represents nationalist, EU-critical and sometimes racist positions. Often referred to as post-fascist, it's one of the successor parties to the MSI movement, which was founded by former officials of fascist dictator Benito Mussolini after the end of the World War II. Meloni is committed to the roots of her party and does not condemn fascism outright. The Fratelli d'Italia, founded in 2012, use a flame in their logo that is reminiscent of Mussolini and is a symbol of the right. Meloni says she's proud of it. China must close its so-called police offices in the Netherlands, which opened without permission from the authorities, and that with immediate effect. This was ordered by Foreign Minister Wopke Hoekstra on Tuesday in The Hague. Hoekstra. He informed the Chinese ambassador about this, the minister said, according to a report by the ANP news agency. The minister called the police officers unacceptable. The Dutch authorities would never have given their consent. The ministry will now investigate exactly what activities took place in the offices. Media found out last week that China had set up police offices in Rotterdam and Amsterdam. Under the guise of service centers, the Chinese authorities are putting pressure on dissidents who have fled. According to the foreign minister, there should also be offices in other European countries. China had stated that the Chinese could, for example, extend their driver's licenses in the offices. But even for such consular tasks, the approval of the authorities of the host country is necessary, said the minister, and rightly so. It remained exciting for a long time, but in the end the alliance around Prime Minister Frederiksen won the majority. However, she wants to resign, but why? Because after the parliamentary elections in Denmark, the Social Democratic Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen announced that she would submit her government's resignation to Queen Margaret II on Wednesday, so it already happened. She said that on early Wednesday morning in front of party supporters in Copenhagen, although the centre-left alliance around her Social Democrats had most likely received a majority in the last-minute election. The left-wing alliance around Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's Social Democrats has won the parliamentary elections in Denmark. And according to the final results published on Wednesday night, Frederiksen's Red Bloc, as they put it, accounted for a total of 90 of the 179 seats in the Danish parliament, and thus a narrow government majority. After the results were announced, Frederiksen announced the formal resignation of her government and coalition negotiations for a broad coalition. On the Danish mainland, Frederiksen's Red Bloc got 87 seats, plus 3 seats in Greenland and the Faroe Islands. The alliance of liberals, conservatives and right-wing populists known as the Blue Bloc won a total of 73 seats in the election. The moderate party of the ex-Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen enters parliament with 16 MPs for the first time. Frederiksen's Social Democrats are the clear winners of the election with 27.5% of the voters who voted for the party, giving it 50 seats in the parliament in Copenhagen. Compared to the 2019 election, the party gained 1.6 percentage points. Opinion polls, on the other hand, pointed to a historically poor result for the Social Democrats, and the post-election polls published on Tuesday evening suggested that neither bloc had achieved a majority. With her resignation, Frederiksen wants to pave the way for a new so-called Queen round. It looks at which of the party leaders has the best chance of looking for a new government. Since the Social Democrats have again become by far the strongest force, Frederiksen is likely to receive this exploratory mandate again. She could then explore the possibilities for a broad government across the political center, which is quite rare for Denmark, by the way. Frederiksen had announced that she would strive for cross-bloc government cooperation. So far, she has been leading a purely social democratic minority government, which was primarily supported in parliament by the left-wing parties. In addition to the fight against inflation, the dominant topics in the election campaign were primarily climate issues and health policy. Around 50,000 people, including Frederiksen, took part in a climate march through Copenhagen on Sunday. Immigration played no role. In the EU country, there has been a cross-party consensus on a restrictive immigration policy for a good 20 years now. Against the background of the tensions with Athens, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has called for a neutral stance from Germany. Erdogan announced this to Chancellor Olaf Scholz in a telephone call on Tuesday, according to a tweet from the Turkish Ministry of Communications. Relations with neighboring Greece are currently at a low point. Ankara argues, for example, that Athens is violating international treaties by militarizing islands in the East Aegean. Greece justified it with a threat from Ankara and the right to self-defense. Erdogan had recently repeatedly threatened Greece with the sentence, "We could suddenly come one night." Yeah, I would defend myself then too. During a first visit to Athens, Scholz defended Greece against threats from Turkey. Greece had also decided to station the first 6 German Marder armored personnel carriers delivered as part of a Ukraine ring exchange on the border with Turkey. In the telephone call with Scholz, Erdogan also suggested reviving the dialogue between Ankara and the European Union, the talks on updating the customs union, and the accession negotiations. The EU accession negotiations with Turkey, which began in 2005, have been on hold for several years because of the unsatisfactory developments in the country from Brussels' perspective. The public had been waiting for this day for quite a long time. It had not been possible to bring Thomas Schmidt before the Austrian Investigative Committee, which is dealing, among other things, with a so-called advertisement affair surrounding ex-Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. Schmidt is considered one of the key figures in the complex surrounding the conservative ÖVP party. Not only the media had the hope that Schmidt, the ex-ÖBAG boss, ex-Secretary General in the Ministry of Finance and ex-Kurz confidant, would provide further revelations, because he had previously testified in detail about the allegations before the Economic and Corruption Prosecutor's Office. And Schmidt is striving for status as a key witness there. The log files of his previous interrogations are more than 450 pages thick. But before the investigative committee, Schmidt said next to nothing. After an initial statement, he refused to testify, because the investigations of the Public Prosecutor's Office have not yet been completed and he does not want to incriminate himself. Unlike before the Prosecutor's Office, Schmidt is under a duty of truth at the committee. The politicians present then applied for numerous fines because they considered the refusal to be unfounded. A court must now examine how expensive Schmidt's silence really is. After enormous losses in the Ukraine war, according to British secret services, Russia lacks modern combat vehicles. Russian soldiers are said to be frustrated at having to use old infantry vehicles called aluminum cans, according to the UK Defence Ministry's daily briefing. By mid-October, Russian units were losing more than 40 vehicles a day in the face of Ukrainian counterattacks, which the British say is about the equipment of an entire battalion. In the past week, Moscow has bought at least 100 additional tanks and infantry fighting vehicles from Belarusian stocks. Presumably, however, it's difficult for the Russian units to procure sufficient suitable replacement for the damaged material, which causes problems for the offensive. The British Ministry of Defence has published daily information on the course of the war since the start of the Russian war of aggression at the end of February, citing intelligence information. With this, London wants to counter the Russian portrayal of events and keep allies in line. Moscow, of course, speaks of a disinformation campaign. Yeah, but the masters of disinformation campaigns are known to all of us. And that is the weekly magazine for today. We see us again next week, I hope. In the meantime, the list of my other channels and schedules is in the video description, so visit me there. You can have a look at something every day of the week. And I'll see you in my next video. But I have to make an announcement as well. I almost forgot. There will be another Brexit or UK video that's not on my UK channel, because it will be on the Outside Views Facebook page, the Outside Views official Instagram, or Outside Views TikTok. And there you will find another video that is not on YouTube, because the guidelines don't allow me to do it, because they would regard it as reused content and it's not allowed to do. So you can only find it there, but maybe you want to do that. I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.